Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon, colleagues, dear participants in our panel session, dear guests of the forum. A year of high technologies and science is over, but still, we pay a lot of attention to such a topic as research and education centers of a top-notch. And even today, this session is one of the longest ones, and today we are happy to have Mr. Falkov, Minister of Science and Higher Education of the Russian Federation, with us, along with the governors who are setting up such centers. Along with us is the Executive Director for Advanced Projects and Science, and our partners who are interested in making sure that the federal measures are supporting their ambitious projects in the area of high tech. This is for the third year that we are setting up research and education centers. There are certain projects which bring us a lot of results, and there are projects which only last year defended their concept. I'd like to pass the floor over to you, Mr. Falkov, as the Minister of Science and Higher Education, which is behind that project. Are you satisfied with the results, with the outcomes, and certainly? Can you respond to the most important question? Will there be any rotation? Thank you so much. I will share some bullet points. Moreover, that there are two circumstances why today, actually, we can share some bullet points and exchange some advances. First of all, last year, we had a big event, the session of the State Council on Science. When preparing for that event, and at the event itself, we discussed a lot of questions, but I'd like to note especially the core commission of the State Council, where we are discussing the research and education centers on a regular basis. Mr. Travnikov is present here. I'd like to appreciate your contribution. So the Research and Education Centers is a long-term project, and we cannot expect short-term results. The first Research and Education Centers were set up 2 years ago. The results that they show are different. We have not obtained any breakthroughs, but it was the first stage where it was important to get some organizational results, to see how the projects with some scientific implications would manifest themselves. So there are some positive cases and cases with no changes. Second thing is that we are deeply convinced that the rotation principle has to become a pivotal one for this project, as far as it creates a competitive environment and gives chances to the constituent members of the Russian Federation, which for some reasons are not part of that project. And we all agree that it would be great to look at the cycle until 2030, how we may set these research and education centers. So we support and welcome the rotation principle. In terms of the mechanism of rotation, this is something that we still have to discuss what it implies. And Artem Nikolaev is sitting on my right. The first stage is about setting up a research and education center. It's a very complex one. So there are 5 Far Eastern constituent members of the Russian Federation, 5 regions. Amid the vast distances that separate them, but they have to establish cooperation on the non-priority topic. This is not healthcare, this is not schooling, something that every governor has to deal with on an everyday basis, but science and education is something that we have to focus on, and building cooperation between the 5 regions takes time. but at the same time, there are regional education centers set up within one region, and they were set up 2 or 3 years ago. And this is something that we can assess already. And in the areas where we do not see any changes, any dynamics, we have to use the rotation mechanism, something that we have to agree on. I think it would be a very dramatic change for the research and education centers concept. One more question. Yesterday, the Association of Innovative Regions of Russia held a big conference dedicated to research and education centers. There were lots of propositions from the industrial partners and universities, and they echoed what's been said at the State Council sessions. Many regions expressed a very simple idea that obviously there should be rotation, because rotation stands for competition. Competition stands for fight for something, fight for the public grants. There are lots of subsidies, mechanisms, and preferences which are being offered by the industrial partners and regions. Something that have to complement the research and education centers concept. Something the regions are going to compete for to make sure that the research and education centers come into shape. What subsidies and preferences can be offered to the companies and industries which are part of that? As the Minister, I'd like to share 3 bullet points regarding research and education centers. How can we improve that program? First of all, we're deeply convinced that we have to improve the role of the governors, heads of the regions. Second, the administrative system has to be strengthened, and these 2 things are intertwined. I mean that we have to proceed from soft cooperation modes to more serious formats among the stakeholders of the research and education centers. This is the first stage when the programs were brought about. But in essence, these programs embraced what we had from the very outset. But now the time is ripe to get some synergies. We know how to work with each other, and we have to define selecting 3 to 4 technological projects. Other things actually can be pushed to the back burner. These are good projects, but there is no place for them in the research and education centers. And resources are needed. Extra resources for the development of research and education centers are needed. And we have to understand the role of research and education centers in the economy. These centers, this is not just an objective per se for the sake of just signing an agreement. A couple of years ago, it was a very hallmark step in terms of the development of higher education and R&D in the region. But now, intelligence multiplied by our other efforts have to bring about synergy. The research and education centers has to make a whole journey as a team of partners universities. They have to think about what contribution they make, and the regions have to determine why they need research and education centers to develop the region, what couple of objectives they're going to achieve. So, better role of the governors, this is number 1. Stronger administrative system, and number 3, more clear, transparent role of research and education center in social economic development. And we are ready to allocate necessary resources to that. Number 4, that's rotation. So these are the main strategic areas and directions for the improvement of research and education centers concept. I do believe that we made our contribution to that. We revisited back in 2021 the youth labs, and 120 youth labs were set up, and they were pegged to research and education centers. 1.4 billion rubles would be allocated to that until 2025. This was our response to fair criticism that we have to dedicate more resources to the development of research and education centers. Along with the colleagues from the regions, now we are analyzing what other support measures can be offered to make sure that research and education centers are more attractive and work more efficiently. Thank you so much. Mr. Travnikov, you presided over the State Committee on Research and Education. Can you answer the question which I asked to Mr. Falkov? What role research and education centers are playing in the social and economic development? Well, colleagues would know that the preparation for the State Council was held in a short period of time, although we were discussing the research and education centers for quite a while. Back in 2019, working in an ad hoc group, we started discussing that. Research and education centers is about confusion of the terms. In that situation, I mean, there are research and education centers of top-notch and rotation. Let me make an overview how it all started. Initially, we actually spoke about setting up 15 top-notch, world-class research and education centers. At the time, it was a very high-profile statement, and it sounded as if we were about setting up the Skolkovo, another Azarov or Dubna center, the center that would influence the world science. Then from the very outset, we saw a dilemma. What approach are we going to use? Either we opt the specialization which the country needs, and it means that the centers have to be distributed somehow on the territory of the country. From the very outset, we had to define what we take as the backbone. Are we proceeding from already existing scientific centers such as Novosibirsk and Tomsk, or we are about starting from scratch somewhere in the Arctic region? The first stage, if you remember, followed this Model 5 research and education centers, had predefined specialization in some specific locations, geographic locations of the country. Then, in response to the rising interest from the regions, we took a decision that the subsequent two stages, the winners, the contenders, would be defined as a result of a contest, and it was the right thing to do, because this is something which was welcomed by the governors and the regional teams. A question arose whether we're going to limit the number of contenders. There was a proposition made, let us not limit the number of the research and education centers, despite the fact that the national project implied setting up 15 such centers. But we said, so let us welcome everyone who is prepared to defend their ideas, and sometime after we will assess the results of the implementation of these pilot programs, and will decide the fate of these projects. And the second confusion is about the rotation. As I heard from different people, rotation not just means in and out, but certain ranking, certain rating. And we said that we may see some top-notch world-class research and education centers, but this is not something you can achieve in a year's time. And some regions probably will never see such world-class centers, but it won't be right just to write off the costs incurred by setting up such a center. Another stage, another level of such a project is needed. For instance, the region will be setting up not a world-class, but a regional-class education center. Research and education center, in my opinion, should follow that scenario. We are more entitled to speak not about a rotation, but rather about rating or ranking. And the ranking would imply subsidies and support. This initiative, as been said, was discussed more than once. We said that if we don't believe it is expedient to increase the financial support, the amount of the grant. There are other measures of support, such as preferences, tax breaks, for instance. Regulatory preferences are there too. For instance, I see 3 levels of the status of different research and education centers. For instance, you have defended your program, it's been approved, and you got 127 million to set up the management system, administration system. It can be complemented with a requirement that this system is formalized, not just a temporary team being intact. You embarked on that program, for instance. 2 or 3 years after, you have to report about the results. So you show the results, you show some advances, scientific advances in the future, and real payback for the economy. After that, you would get a level up, and you will get another support measure. For instance, you'll be entitled to take part in some programs of the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. For instance, last year we got a very good experience of setting up youth labs within the research and education centers. And again, you use the same labs or any other mechanisms. Sometime after, in a couple of years, you report on the results, and we see that you may really claim the status of the world-class research and education center, that the projects in the pipeline may have some global implications. After that, you will get another level up, and you may claim something different support measures, such as tax breaks, regulatory preferences. I heard some criticism, which is quite justified, provided by the financiers, that there are too many formats of such structures. In essence, a research and education center, this is the same thing as a Skolkovo or R&D center, but it's not localized on certain territory, but in terms of interaction between the stakeholders, this is the same thing. Why a research and education center cannot claim the same tax breaks as an R&D center? Why they cannot claim some fast-track certification procedures as Skolkovo does? This is the 3rd level of support, for instance. Well, if I may, quick question. So a session of the State Council was held. The propositions which you have voiced are not there in the draft decision of that council. What we, as the representatives of the region, have to do in order to make sure the research and education centers make another step forward? Well, it's been discussed at the level of the president. We remember that Mr. Putin said that we have to discuss that additionally with the finance ministry. Secondly, we came up with a compromise making reference to that suggestion of the president. And after that, it would be submitted for the consideration of the State Council, the initiatives which were developed in 2021, which were voiced at the workshop prior to the State Council session. And actually, they are not pushed to the back burner, but they would be discussed with the president. Just thank you so much. Research and education centers, this is a new tool. And just like any other new tool, it should build trust, build confidence, starting from the regional administrations and ending with the holdings and industrial partners. I'd like to take this opportunity to invite Oleg Evtushenko, Executive Director, Russian Technology State Corporation. Oleg, Research and Education Center is a new team, something that the governors and industrial partners are working with. Russian Technology State Corporation, do you see the Research and Education Center as a tool you are going to use and how this tool is going to be developed in future. Inaudible. Inaudible. Can you hear me now? Yes, we see you and we can hear you very well. Okay. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and certainly we see certain potential behind the research and education centers. Our strategy implies that every second ruble by 2025 will have to earn from the civil purpose products. Our enterprises are very active in 4 research and education centers: Eurasian R&D Center, Agrobiotech, and Tumu. And this concept is only in its infancy, and certainly would like to get results as fast as possible. But as Mr. Falkov said, I will agree with that. And we have to build confidence. There's been arranged, necessary infrastructure has been set up. But still, let me highlight certain problems without any prejudice to the success that's been achieved. First of all, most of the research and education centers are not bringing about new projects, but they are developing the old ones. So these are the brownfield projects. Certain relations have been set up with business partners and universities, and research and education centers welcome industrial partners, but I'd like to see some added value from the research and education center. Really, we have very good relations with Samara University, but we used to work with that before. When I talked to Samara Center, and they act as an integrator, as a mediator between science and industry, but still would like to see the role of the research and education center in the implementation of these objectives.
The job of the center is to show its advantages as compared to the traditional bilateral format, enterprise university. So, second, it is necessary to come to one opinion regarding financial attractiveness of the centers, and regions have various facilities like industrial parks and others, but they are different in different regions. And if we compare regional centers with interregional centers, I think we colleagues should work at this and formulate the same uniform regulations which would enforce both in Skolkovo and in Seversk and in other places. And the following thing about concerns working with regions. For example, in your regions, we work with it. We would like the Research and Education Center to contact with high levels, so that to achieve high levels in order to produce something. We would like the research and education centers to be connected not only with regional enterprises, but high level enterprise, and I will help you with this. And I would like to add, I have already spoken about that at our previous meeting before the State Council mentioned, it is not so easy to work with the state money on startups. There are state funds with which we work, and they have the right to a mistake, to an error. Sometimes they can produce a product which would not be successful in the market. And so I would like to bring your attention to this issue so that we would have more freedom in this field. Well, that's about all. Thank you very much. Please, Nikolaev, comment on this. Well, that depends not only on the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. The procedure of working with state funds is determined by other ministries as well, and so we support the vector towards granting the right to risk. And for the sake of justice, we should not mention that in late 2020, the ministry has developed the necessary amendments. But I would agree with Oleg Nikolaevich. It concerns not only science and education centers. It's a broader area of working with state resources, which should allow to ensure the risks of bona fide researchers, or those who want to make shorter the way from an idea to a specific project. Of course, it's a subject for a separate conversation, but we will note it down. And if there are good proposals, perhaps Andrey Alexandrovich and we all could discuss it, because your platform is very authoritative. It has the right to make proposals. The year of science has ended, but there are a lot of problems to be discussed within the framework of the decade of science. Thank you very much. Oleg Nikolaevich has raised several very important issues, including the value added, because the projects that were developed by scientific and education centers have been long ago worked at, and questions were raised. What is the value of the centers? And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Azarov from to Mr. Dmitry Azarov, the governor of the Samara region, because, well, he has quite a lot of information, and I would like to ask you, Dmitry, what is your opinion on this issue? Thank you very much. I'm glad to welcome all the participants of the discussion. It is with pleasure that I have heard you, and I would say that the subject is really broad. But every time when we discuss things, we discover new aspects, and I'm grateful to Valery Nikolaevich Falkov for supporting the NOTS idea. In principle, it is difficult for one ministry to work with this idea, and so I have some proposals which we have prepared with colleagues, and it concerned all-round support of the scientific and education centers by various bodies of the Russian Federation. It is difficult to answer your questions. I have just 5 minutes, and at the State Council session I had 7 minutes, so my job was easier. But of course, the most important thing is the advanced development of regions. Mr. Travnikov has touched upon important conceptual subjects. For example, rotation. What is rotation? What should we understand under this term? Well, there is a certain vision of scientific and education centers. I believe that they are an ecosystem of connection between science and production. At different stages of the development of our country, the approach to the solution of this task was different. Some in-branch universities and institutions were set up in order to resolve this problem. Now, at the current stage, we know that the orbit of these activities should include not only education and scientific institutions, but a whole pool of industrial partners. So, Speaking of results of scientific and research and education centers, well, they create 5,000. They have created 5,000 jobs as at the 31st of December, 2021. And many other things, but a very important step has been made to bring closer the interests of the partners, the industrial enterprises and research and education institutions. Good results have been achieved, but this work is long-term. And if measures of supporting nodes is limited by 2024, there's no need to discuss it further. It would be useless. I believe that research and education centers are forever. It is a creation of a certain ecosystem. We have created a certain, we have achieved certain results. For example, our national research university, the Korolev University, began to cooperate with the Ministry of Education and Research. We have found out that they were solving the wrong problems, remembering the level of technological preparedness, which is assessed on a scale from 1 to 9, and there are gaps at the 4th and 7th stage. And in our interaction, we have found out if the university was working on a satellite and they were working on its measurements, and the real necessity was to develop the accuracy of its observations. So they were solving the wrong problem. So sometimes this interaction is useless. And now this interaction is achieving a new level, a new stage. Now our universities and laboratories better understand their job, the requirements by the industrial partners. They do not fantasize and invent problems to resolve. No, I see here a much closer tie between science and production, and I believe that this is a very important aspect of regional development of research and education centers, and results here exist and they are obvious. And colleagues, I don't know if it should be done here, but let me remind you of our proposals which we have made at the session of the State Council and Oleg Nikolaevich. These proposals were noticed. The President mentioned that our proposals are being considered, but part of those proposed, not the reference clause, compromise variant, will be taken into account. And one of them is prolongation of the work of scientific and education centers until the year 2030. It is also instructing the Scientific Development Commission of the State Council of the Russian Federation to work in assessment and support of scientific education centers. Valery Nikolaevich, thank you very much for this work, but this is definitely outside the sphere of competence of one ministry. That's why we suggested this mechanism through the Commission of Scientific Development. We also proposed to create in the regional institutions of scientific development with curators of science and education centers. This is a very important thing for the whole country. Also considering the establishment of regulatory documents that would provide for grants being given to science and education centers, and the possibility of funding research and development projects by creating special funds for this. And besides, we need to think about the interest of commercial companies with state participation. And here we suggest reduce considering a revision of the provision on the reduction of the share of profit being used for the development of such centers, etc. Well, I'm sorry I have little time, so I would like to thank all the governors and all the regions partners and Andrey Zdunov, who has very actively worked. Artem Zdunov, who has been very active in this field. We have a so-called studio of painted landscape, and he has taken upon him, he has assumed all this work, and I would like to hear his opinion on the structure of management of scientific and education centers, etc., and the initial stage of taking stock of the work of science and education centers. And now we have reached the stage when we have to cut all the superfluous, like good sculptors. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Dmitry Ilyich, for such rich presentation. Well, science and education centers provide very good advantages for activities of development ties between industry and science, but how should its management be structured correctly so that all those great resources and structure which the centers have, how should it be correctly managed, judging on your experience and on information that you know? Thank you very much. Dmitry Ilyich is the main subject of this work, and I represent the rank and file. When I started doing this work, when it was all being created, we asked who is responsible for this work, and we decided that the first persons of the regions should be in control. Otherwise, nothing will be done. There will be no structure if the governor does not work. And second, it's a scientific and education center is not a venture. When documents were adopted, when decisions on funding were adopted, who are these main subjects? Universities, who have their own programs, ministers of education who have their own programs and who get funding, subjects of the Federation. We all, according to a new program, have 5 priorities, and we have curators from the government. And so we have to present our work. We should not have too many priorities. You know, the subject has 5 priorities. A university has other priorities, and the scientific education center will be working on something else. We should have 2 or 3 priorities. We have 4, but we are bigger. We have more subjects. We are in the same climatic zone, and we should work on, the agricultural subjects. And if we manage to get some foreign students, if we manage to achieve some commercial results, then we achieve our goal. So this is a long-term long-term work. So I have a vision of this work which presupposes that you should prove what you have done, and then you get your money. And there shouldn't be a possibility for a participant to do something and then say that it has failed and the money has been lost. No, this must not be done. They may achieve something going to the international level. They can achieve something in the field of engineering, and if enterprises pay for what we have done, then we have succeeded. If we fail to do something, for example, I asked Oleg Nikolaevich on one issue connected with Rostec. Well, we cannot cope without them, but we are looking for solutions. So a good beginning makes a good ending. So going back to industrial partners, in the future we will have many of them, and universities have understood better the requirements of industrial partners. And I would like to ask Mr. Bloshenko, I would like to provoke a discussion before the second industrial partner answers. Unfortunately, Mr. Evtushenko is no longer on air, but I would like to answer if there are any fears of spending state money on such projects. Let them use their own money. That's why he has left the discussion. Oleg Nikolaevich, please answer. We are talking about our own money, the money of state or public corporations, not about the state as such. Alexander Vitalyevich, Roskosmos is a huge and extra strong industrial partner for any science and education center. Have you seen a science and education center as an instrument or as a tool which you could use as an industrial partner? I would like to know your opinion. Thank you. Do you hear me? Yes, we do. Yes. Thank you. You know, Roskosmos is a somewhat specific entity, because we are not just a public corporation, but the aerospace activities body, and this space has always been on the cutting edge of innovations. We're also the regulator in the field of space activities, and this creates a certain workload for us. As regards added value, I would like to say that we work with 4 science and education centers in Siberia, in Siberia, the Eurasian Center, the Urals Center, and the Samara Center, Engineering of the Future. Here I would like to thank Dmitry Igorovich.
Thank you for the format of the work that you arranged. Before doing something, we really, has been said, we got together and we discussed what we need, so that we don't do that just as a token measure. We do not consider Research and Education Center as a kind of a schoolco with lots of residents, lots of startup companies and innovative companies, and we keep thinking actually what objectives to put forward for them. We really, in fact, delegated to Samara Center a big deal of objectives, which we're facing at the corporate level, meaning that we made them a full-fledged operator, a one-stop shop operator working with the innovators. We have Samara Progress, manufacturer of rockets and booster engines. It has very good ties with Nikolaev Institute, but we don't need research and education centers for that. But we now understand how we can bring about an equality to such cooperation. Research and Education Center is considered as an infrastructural format, as a long-term project, which would help us attain our goals. Apart from commercial space research, we also set up a commercial department for the International Space Station. And we need an inflow of fresh ideas for that. As far as the ISS, that's a real test lab. Last year, we approved the corporate strategy for dealing with the core universities, defining the universities, the academia, which are pivotal for us, which are important for us, which are integrated into the system of Roskosmos, which are interacting with our enterprises. And they would be the sole suppliers for our enterprises. Means that we don't need some academic knowledge. We need knowledge which would be integrated into the rockets and missiles that we're building. Therefore, we are integrating the higher school and students' training for the enterprises which are performing our orders. Well, whether Research and Education Center is a long-term or a short-term project, in our opinion, this is a long-term story. The service life of our products is no less than 60, 70 years. Therefore, this is not just the death valley. We are just approached this abyss, something that we have to overcome altogether. We're very much interested in the research and education centers in terms of setting up the flow of innovations into the space and rocket industry, and to perform the projects. This is something that we delegated to the research and education centers at the corporate level. As a request, Mr. Falkov, what I may list. Won't Mr. Rogozin be angry if I spill some beans? We actually planned, Mr. Falkov, to invite you to our space drone when we're about launching Moon 2025. Many decades after we are back to the moon, that would be their first craft which would land on the south pole of the moon, and 45 years after we are launching this our spacecraft there. And let me raise another question. I think that for more than 2 years we worked on such a mechanism as a comprehensive scientific and technical program. We came up with a very powerful program. It was initiated by our Novosibirsk enterprise, Roskosmos enterprise, and it embraces 100 different academia from Moscow region, from Samara region, to develop multiple satellite settings or groupings. But we were interested in attracting more academia institutions to our program. But this program came to a halt. We do not know what happened to that. So you submitted that for the consideration of the government. It was returned to you, and we don't know its further fate. We believe that this comprehensive scientific and technical program can become a very good support measure for all our endeavors. Summing up, we are very much interested in the further development of research and education centers. We have positive experience of dealing with the engineering of the future research and education center. We obtained a unique quality and sense in that education, and therefore we are interested in further development of such projects. Thank you so much, Mr. Falkov. we are speaking about a comprehensive scientific and technological projects. Would you share some comments? Well, comprehensive scientific and technological program. This is one of the tools which consists of the private and common things. Certainly, we are going to meet our colleagues from Roskosmos to see what is about that research and scientific and technological program. Well, we launched the tool itself 3 years ago. It was discussed 3 years back in 2016, and 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, the government regulation was published, and for 2 years we couldn't launch that. In 2021, the first comprehensive scientific and technological project was launched, and I will not elaborate further on that, but we have to just simplify that project. And in that case, it could be used more efficiently. But getting back to more common things, staying within the common things, I will leave the private things aside. Still, we're going to launch that with Roskosmos. We have such comprehensive programs with almost all the major corporations. But getting back to the common questions, I think that it's worth thinking, and it fits very well with the rationale of the instructions of the president and the regulations of the government, how we can boost the development of research and education centers by means of comprehensive scientific and technological projects. Actually, this is the way to attract, to allure more investments. The youth lab or comprehensive scientific and technological
как я еще раз в самом начале сказал, будем способствовать.
program is a way to attract more money. We assess different tools, and this is when we're going to take decisions proceeding from what
В большей степени будет способствовать развитию новых.
could contribute more to the development of the research and education centers. Why? We decided to set up youth labs because we proceeded from the fact that the
должны появиться новые тематики.
we believe that some new topics have to be offered. We spoke about added value, so something new has to emerge which didn't exist before the research and education centers. So once you set up a research and education center, and since September we actually have it full-fledgedly.
Мы исходили из
It never happened.
тематики.
Setting up youth labs, we proceeded from the fact that it would offer new priorities, new projects, new things which would grow, and in 5 to 7 years, end of the day, we'll not just have certain ideas, but we'll have an interesting product. From that standpoint, the comprehensive scientific technological project, this is actually about elaborating on the past advances.
Более актуально.
We believe that it's more
Ответ.
important to look at other tools rather than comprehensive scientific and technological programs. Chelyabinsk is an industrial region. If the Research and Education Center is involved in the work of the industrial partners, this is how they can invest their private money into these projects. And as head of the core commission of the State Council, which interacts with the Ministry of Finance, how are you going to
Заседание секции.
support our colleagues, how to support these initiatives money-wise?
Комиссия Госсовета уже активно
Our State Council Commission
совместно
interacts with lots of governors, and quite recently we had a joint session of the committee in order to offer extra financial measures to develop the research and education center. So this work is going on to develop any region. Something that we're speaking about now, development of education, of science, new competences. These are one of the most important objectives that we're facing, the competition between the regions, becomes more intensive. There are regions which traditionally are quite strong because of the strong universities, and the urban environment is better developed. The research and education centers and the campuses projects which are being implemented by the ministry
По-новому посмотреть на развитие регионов, поэтому, Валерий,
give us
спасибо.
an opportunity to look anew at the development of the region. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Falkov, and the government for offering these new opportunities. Answering practically to a question, what is important for Chelyabinsk region? We are part of Ural's Research and Education Center, along with Kurgansk and some other regions. For me, this is about the symbiosis of industry and science.
Продукт на конкретное изделие.
We believe that research and education centers won't be effective and efficient if it has no application for the industrial purposes. The regional authorities now have such opportunities to become an active participant in the development of business and science. And that's great that now we have such a new substance, a new tool to develop economy in general. We have 17 projects within Research and Education Center. Our major industrial stakeholders are still participating in the development of cooperation with academia. For instance, Magnitogorsk Metalworks is our strong stakeholder. Out of 17 projects, 3 projects I'm in charge of personally. Each of them are developing very actively. We're working with Roskosmos, developing the engines for the rockets and spacecrafts which would return back to Earth fully intact, not just partially. We're working on that, and I believe that as long as we can showcase our results, we will get more financial support. There is another project called Arctic Bus, which we implement along with our bus enterprise. Extremely low temperatures. The bus have to be capable of operating there in the very harsh climate conditions. More or less, as the company invests heavily into the development of that project, it enjoys public support, state support, according to Regulation 218. This is actually when business is interested in that. By 2024, we will show the first prototype. And we will launch necessary production. And the third project that I'm monitoring, this is the frequency transformer, a project which would improve the efficiency of any energy generation system. This is not just about input substitution, but this is a state-of-the-art and advanced product which we develop along with our technological partner. And a shop to produce this transformer is being built. I think that next year we will see the first products. This is about a very specific matter, about a very specific result. New competences for the region, for the development of new skills and competences. As rotation is concerned, let me also say a few words. I must say that out of 17 projects initially, which we agreed on within the Research and Education Center, I say that we have to make certain rotation within the center. Some time passed, 2 years passed since we launched that in 2020. Certain projects did not take off the ground, and the rotation within the Research and Education Center
что сейчас время ротировать сами.
Actually, that's the very right thing to do. I don't know whether there are any such centers which did not do anything until today, but we have to show some results. We have, I stand up for rotation, I stand up for distribution of grants, I stand up for competition, and this is the very right approach, which certainly will meet the objectives of the competition. Everything related to the educational component, let me draw an example. I asked businessmen why they need the Research and Education Center to make that transformer a supercomputer which is stationed in the Urals University, did all the calculations, and we now invite the postgraduate students who are interested in bringing together the science and technology and industry and expect results. For me, this is of dramatic importance. I'm a no-nonsense person, a very practically minded person. So, Mr. Nikolaev, Yakutia, actually accounts for about 25% of the territory of the Russian Federation. The 5 regions which are managing together this research and education center, what challenges are there, what opportunities are there? Well, such a territorially distributed system of our research and education center certainly makes it unique. First 6 months were marked with lots of challenges and mistakes, and when we were to defend our project, we were told that there are some things we have to focus on now. We understand that the managing team, the project office of our Research and Education Center, has to be independent from any region, and the people there are independent from any regional authority. At the same time, our supervisory board, as we agreed with all the governors, will just be flexible and representatives of every region would be heading supervisory board every 6 months. That's very important because every region has unique competences, unique features, which may help us to make breakthrough discoveries of world class. For instance, Sakhalin. Sakhalin announced a program to move to carbon-free economy. Kamchatka, the thermal power, this is the competence that they are totally unrivaled. Yakutia, life body behavior in extremely low temperature, permafrost and its change, climate change in the Arctic region. Really, also we have a world-class competence. In such a synergy, acting such cooperation, we still want that all our strengths are been somehow boosted, that in a synergy we can come up with new discoveries, new approaches in order to apply that for economic development of the constituent members of the Russian Federation. This territory accounts for 25% of the Russian Federation, and certainly we cannot develop that without state-of-the-art technologies and discoveries. And what is going on that territory, that's very important. For instance, thawing of permafrost. Permafrost covers the bulk of the Russian territory.
And when we talk about the creation of a system of monitoring of permafrost, we are mostly talking about observation. But in Yakutia, we have a law on protection of permafrost, and we have a long-term program on scientific observation of all construction projects in order to save permafrost. And when we see that when large federal players come into the Republic, these issues are not taken due consideration of. And then there are problems appear when construction projects are being put into practice. And then they remember that the science of Yakutia has a lot of experience here. And of course, the creation of a scientific and education center in this field helps to prevent such problems. And our partners or future partners already use our services, and I believe that here science must be a priority for us. And our second science and education center in the north will be one of those mechanisms that will help to support the development of the Far Eastern Yakutia, which our president has mentioned. We must think of something in order to develop such a huge territory more quickly. Now, governors and representatives of industry have spoken. Now, I would like to ask a question about the long-term prospects. In 10 years, if a science and education centers will be put into practice, will be developed at the international level, if we reach the international standards, so what will be achieved? Of course, you are a public official, and it's difficult for you to speak because it would be a commitment from your part. But speak not about your commitments, but about your vision. Well, I would agree with Andrey Igorovich that science and scientific science and education centers must become a permanent part of regional development process. It would be a new quality of interaction. For me, Science and Education Center is, first of all, quality and density of communication. So I believe that organizational forms will change in future. Some structures may be merged or not, but that is not the primary issue. Science and Education Centers were not created for that part particularly. But in any case, science and education organizations will be integrated very much. Perhaps they will merge, and new legal entities will appear, and new forms of cooperation will appear between the industry and research units and education units. And I believe, I hope, we have discussed this with colleagues, that every region, of course, has its own specific features. In some places, there's more agriculture. In other places, there are more forestry. Some have a lot of mineral resources. But science and technology should everywhere become a priority and the basis of development of all industries, including traditional industries. And university will not, and the universities will take part in new and unique forms of cooperation in every region. We are now at a very difficult stage. We are looking at each other, trying to learn from each other, and we are trying to build from scratch, sometimes using international experience. We are trying to work in this country, although we know that international ways of doing things may not always be installed here in Russia. We have a different historical context. So I believe that with time, there will be a unique regional and interregional system of management, and we will have some offices at the governors of regions, and we will have we will have also bodies which will be in charge of all education, higher education, specialized education, etc. And the Constitution and the laws that we have allow us to work in this direction. In some parts, this will be the main scientific or education organization, and nowadays we hear governors mentioned, for example, the most important university in their region, and those universities are not legally the main universities, but in fact we used to live differently. Our mentality was rather parochial. We were interested in our own affairs, every ministry, every institution, every university, and now we are establishing contacts. And now you have, as it has been mentioned, for example, in Urals, the university has 18 projects, because everybody is contributing, and in many places development is very fast, like in Samara, and there's prioritization. People begin to understand which things are most important, which are less important, and now the dialogue with the industry is different. It has achieved a new level of quality. All secondary things are being forgotten. Of course, articles are important, new curricula are important, quality of education is important, but we need products which could be used and reproduced in Rostec plants, or also some projects in the space area. And I am more than sure, and I'm grateful to my colleagues, we have feedback here. We have now a conventional agreement about rotation. It has been mentioned by everyone. It could be a rotation in the form of differentiation and levels of complexity of science and education centers. So your level can be changed based on your performance. It is an interesting idea. It is, of course, not always comfortable, but you need to stimulate. We should understand that why we use various measures. We should stimulate development, and not punish for something. And I'm sure that we will succeed, and that we will have a very good projects. Out of the 15 existing entities, 3 to 5 will be really successful, according to my feeling, but it is a normal situation, and I think it is worth doing. Out of 35, there are 35 units of the Federation which develop science and education centers of the international standards, but there are some also self-styled science and education centers in other regions, which is also very interesting. So we will get, well, finally, our purpose is to have a totally different quality of life for people, so that our science would have a practical dimension, not just a change of our idea of life, of the world, of the universe, but also something which can improve our living standards. I'm sure that we will be able to do that. So let us wait a little, let us give some time to the first research and education centers, because in science things happen slowly. This is the work of a great number of people, and you will get some tangible results only a few years after. do not expect things to happen very quickly. We understand that if our colleagues achieve certain results, these results are based on old research, and I think that towards the end of 2024 we have two important dates, 2024 and 2030, and I believe that at the end of 2024 we can discuss practical results of these projects, and we can invite not just governors and representatives of ministries, but we should invite representatives of industries to come here and to make a show of what has been achieved, sort of exhibition. Thank you. Andrey Alexandrovich, the same question, but in a broader perspective. The decade of science has become a very important thing and a very pleasant thing for many. It was announced at the State Council. So what major steps should be done by the state and representatives of regions all together in order in 10 years achieve real results? So I should, after the minister, I should paint a horizon for 10 years. Well, the regional dimension. Well, I believe that not just in 10 years, but during a shorter period, in the Russian Federation, thanks to various activities, well, science and research and education center is also a sort of activity of the regions. So thanks to various activities, we will find the solution to this value of death problem. Yes, we are deprived of those tools that had our predecessor in the Soviet Union. We no longer have those industrial institutes. We have risks of venture funding, etc., etc. But I believe that within the next 5 years, thanks to our common research, we'll be able to create a set of tools that will help us to overcome this value of death and to do big things. Thank you. So, colleagues, we do not have too much time, just 5 minutes. So I would like the governors to give some final thoughts, some points, a joint wish to all who is taking part in this process. Well, the point that I have already voiced is all about results. We do need real, tangible results. And we want these projects to have a better quality and to advance science, education, and, of course, our industrial enterprises. This is a requirement to Research and Education Center, and I believe that if we all work constantly, there will be certain results. I believe that within the framework of research and education centers, we should do some confidence building between the authorities, the centers, the universities, the industries. This will give a very good synergy effect. Dmitry Igorevich Azarov, what's your opinion? Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the forum for their attention to the subject. I think this is very important. The Gaidar forum is always focused on future, but but in the light of the present, and the fact that it has paid attention to research and education centers is very important. I would like to thank you all for this discussion. I am glad to have participated in this discussion, albeit remotely, and have listened to Valery Nikolaevich, Andrey Alexandrovich, and our colleagues from the regions, my governor colleagues. I believe that over the latest 20 days we have advanced very much towards understanding the role of research and education centers and overall development. I have found the discussion very useful, and I'm sure that this joint work will help us achieve the results that our industrial partners, our colleagues from universities and the Ministry of Higher Education are waiting for, and those results which our regions are waiting for. And our research activities must become tangible for all the people of the country. Thank you very much, Dmitry Georgievich. And I would mention concentration. I think that what matters today is concentration of all resources. We ask additional preferences from the Ministry of Education. We opened youth laboratories within the framework of science or research and education centers. And our partners, among our partners, we have a lot of resources, and they should be all concentrated in the Research and Education Center, and the results will help us to achieve more success on the world market and in production in general. Our colleagues, thank you very much. I would like to say just a couple of words. Oleg Nikolaevich, please. Well, Alexey Leonidovich has mentioned it. He says he is a practical man. I agree with him. I'm also a practical. So I think we should organize an exhibition of achievements of science, of research and education centers. We understand now that the exhibition has the general partner, and we rely on you. We hope that the unions of the Federation and everybody will feel comfortable at that exhibition. So, Alexey Konstantinovich, you. I would like to thank once again all the organizers, all the participants. I think we all are in excellent dialogue with all the stakeholders. Last year it was the anniversary of the first man in space, so I have sent an SMS message to all of you, and I'm sorry that I haven't mentioned our cooperation with you. So we are cooperating with you. So we are very much interested in this work, and we have no doubts about results. Thank you very much. So, colleagues, by way of wrapping up our discussion, when I came here, I took off my state functionary hat and put on the hat of our moderator. So, as the moderator, I would like to thank you all very much. It's very interesting with you. And putting on my public official's hat, I would like to say that all the priorities of Research and Education Center give us a lot of optimism for future development of this of these entities. I would like to thank you for the success of this work. I would like to thank all the participants, including the governors, who show us the example of conducting scientific, industrial, and other policies. And so Roskosmos, Rostec, and other similar corporations which take part in this large and important project show that this tool is already functioning. And let us hope that in 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, we will have results that will justify the trust for this tool. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Все, уважаемые участники, всем большое спасибо.